We're going to try and set a good example here in the opening session, see how it goes. There's still a few people registering, so they'll be wandering in. But let's go ahead and start. Everybody can take a seat. And welcome, everyone. Thank you all for coming to the 5th Annual Ecosystem Services Partnership Conference. And on the theme of ecosystem services come of age, linking science, policy, and participation for sustainable human well-being. I think that's what ecosystem services are all about. How do we acknowledge, recognize, value, manage the contribution of natural ecosystems to sustainable human well-being. I think one of the biggest challenges we continue to face, is linking and integrating all of the various elements, people, programs that are working on ecosystem services. That's the whole point of the Ecosystem Services Partnership. How do we coordinate all of the huge amount of activity that is now going on in this area? Around the science of ecosystem services, how do we quantify, map, model, value these services? How do we build the institutions, the governance, the management systems to deal with them? And finally, how do we better communicate and coordinate this activity, and how do we implement some of these ideas to really achieve that goal of sustainable human well-being? You're probably all aware that the science of ecosystem services has been growing exponentially. This is just a plot of the number of papers published on this topic area from the ISI Web of Knowledge. Well over 1,000 papers just in 2011, and over 6,000 papers cumulatively over that period, with the equivalent number of citations. So there's a huge increase in scientific activity and research on this topic. Some of the journals the top 25 journals are listed here that have published papers on this topic. You can see that Ecological Economics has published the most, but there's over 700 journals that have published something on ecosystem services, which is quite amazing. And this is all prior to the launch of the new Elsevier journal titled Ecosystem Services, which I'm sure will be a place for many of the ideas, and some of the ideas coming out of this conference. We also know that people working in this area generally work collaboratively. They have a large number of co-authors in general. So this is a team effort, and it's really a transdisciplinary team effort. It's not just people working in one discipline contributing to it. It's a matter of people working together, and so hopefully we can do some of that here in the next few days. We also know that people working in this area have complex networks of co-authors. And this is just a diagram of some of those networks, and they tend to cluster in various ways, but this represents an idea of the social capital behind the endeavor. And that's certainly one thing that the ESP is trying to enhance, is to build and maintain this social capital. On the policy side, I and several others of you I know were at the Rio Plus 20 conference. A bit maybe disappointing on the official government side, but I think there was one clear consensus that was coming out of that meeting in all the side events and even in some of the official events, that the recognition that natural capital and ecosystem services really are essential, important elements to take into consideration in any sort of development strategy going forward. Lots of disagreement about exactly what that means, but I think there was that clear consensus. So I think ecosystem services really have come of age in the policy arena, and it's now, I think, a huge opportunity to how to build on that, how to implement that, and I think that's something that our joint cooperative effort can really contribute to. There were many side events. One was about the World Bank's WAVES program, and you'll hear from Glenn Marie Lang later talking more about that. In the official document, there was not much mentioned, but there was this one paragraph that said, and I found that most of the paragraphs in that document started with something like, we note that, or we take note, or we acknowledge, or it wasn't much of a commitment on anything, but It did recognize that the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services is now established, and Hal Mooney will talk a little bit more about that in a second. On the communication side, I think there's several mistaken identities or misconceptions that are out there that we probably need to address to better communicate these ideas. The first one being that economics does not equal the market. The market is one institution that we can use to help achieve our goals, our joint goals. I think we really need to establish how to better manage our system to meet all of our goals. The second one is that valuation is not equal to privatization or commodification or necessarily trading. So knowing the value, the contribution of these services to our well-being does not imply that we want to privatize them or trade them in markets necessarily. There are other ways of managing these resources, but the valuation, I think, goes on nonetheless, whether we acknowledge it or not, because we are making trade-offs for these resources. So I think our challenge is to recognize that and to do a better job of understanding that contribution and expressing it in whatever the appropriate terms are. And finally, that expressing those trade-offs in monetary units does not equal market values or monetization in a traditional sense. There are several ways to express trade-offs, and I think that has to do more with how do we best communicate with the audience that we're trying to communicate with. We can express the trade-offs in other units. So we are all gathered here today, I think, to make progress along these lines, and there are participants now from 49 different countries and 210 different cities. You can probably locate yourself on this map somewhere. And we have, I think, a unique program and format for this conference that will hopefully help us achieve these goals. So we're here today in the opening plenary session with a couple of keynote speeches and just introductions to get things going, set the stage, and tell you what the state of play. After that, we'll have the parallel world presentations, and you all know, I hope, that you each have, if you're making a presentation there, you have a 5-minute slot. And so I know it's probably a challenge to condense what you had to say into 5 minutes, but I think it's an opportunity too to really get your message very concisely stated. And we will hold you to that 5 minutes. So when your 5 minutes are up, we will move on to the next PowerPoint and take away the microphone. You can keep talking if you want. So, and as you know, the reason for doing that is that way we can have everyone talk for a shorter period of time to a larger fraction of the audience. And that will be followed by a reception and poster presentation. You can see some of the posters are already up here, some of them just fell down. But, and that will be in this room and in the adjoining rooms, and there'll be drinks to go along with that. So the idea is the first day we will try to get most of the presentations, the formal presentations, out of the way, and leave the second and third day largely for working groups. And the working groups, we really want people to take advantage of the fact that we were all here together physically. So we don't want to necessarily spend all of our time, sitting in an audience listening to somebody talk. We want to interact and actually work on solving some of these problems and challenges and issues that we brought up. So let's use that time effectively. We have over 30 working groups that have already been proposed. And what we'll do on Wednesday morning in the open space session that you see listed there is to put those up on the walls, and you can sign up for any one of those working groups. Or if you have a new idea that you just came up with and want to start a new working group, you can propose that as well. So there's an opportunity for ad hoc working groups. We'll then see how many people are in each of those groups, and we'll assign rooms as necessary. And then you'll spend the time needed in the working groups. On the last day, then report back to the plenary session briefly again, a short 5-minute presentation on what your working group came up with, what you're doing, and then we'll have a final synthesis session before we have the ESP members meeting at the very end. So hopefully you all can stay for that. And that will not be the end. There are other things happening this year, many other things actually, around the topic of ecosystem services, including the Ecological Society of America meeting, which is immediately following this next week. And certainly that will have a lot of stuff on ecosystem services. You know about the Eco Summit in Columbus, Ohio, and end of September on restoring the planet's ecosystem services. And finally, there's the ACES meeting in Fort Lauderdale in December this year. So we want to thank all of you for coming. We also want to thank our sponsors for helping us get to this point. And here's a list of all of them. We also want to thank our organizing committee. And so there were quite a few people who helped us to think about and organize this conference. And you'll recognize your names there. And finally, I want to say what some of our goals, I think, are for ESP, is to help us to sort of all pull oars in the same direction at the same time. And I think there's been a lot of more pulling our oars in opposite directions. And we're not going to make much progress if we continue to do that. So I think one of our big challenges is coordinating, integrating, trying to all figure out how we can work together so we can move the boat down the stream much more quickly than we have been so far in the past. And finally, you probably already know this, but this is the person who made most of this happen. And so if you have any compliments or complaints, she's the person to go to. Where are you? She's out there somewhere.